Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective as we're talking about the recent incident involving Salman Rushdie, the novelist who has been under threat of attack by orders of the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran ever since about around 1990 or so. He was finally assaulted almost lethally on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, the end of last week. And he's expected to survive and to function and to live with probably some very unfortunate permanent damage. And here to discuss it with me is Mark Pellegrino.
Oh, hey, Rucka, how are you?
Hey, pretty good. Trying to process everything that's taken place. Please, everybody, leave a like, super chat your questions or thoughts, and support this network because we're one of the few networks that can defend Salman Rushdie in a meaningful way. So hit that join button to become a member as well. So when it comes to Salman Rushdie, so he was, like I said, he wrote a book called Satanic Verses. It was perceived as insulting or in some way depicting the Prophet Muhammad, which is not looked at kindly by some Muslim interpreters, including the Iranian government, whose supreme leader issued a death decree offering $1 million or $3 million for the head of Salman Rushdie. He was then in hiding for about a decade and then said, you know what, I'm not going to hide anymore, and began appearing in public with no security, or with some security, but he is not hiding away anymore. He's been making many public appearances, including appearing on a couple seasons ago on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Have you seen that?
Did I see that? Maybe.
Fatwa, the musical, doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, Fatwa the musical. So Larry David, he produces Fatwa the musical, and of course, a fatwa is immediately placed on himself by Iran. So he ends up meeting Salman Rushdie in one of the early episodes of the season, and Solomon tells him, "When you've got a fatwa on you, the ladies find you irresistible." So it was a very funny episode and funny season.
Great. I should look that episode up.
Absolutely. So what does this story mean to you? The case of Salman Rushdie and the attack on him, and just the ongoing decades of threats against him, and what he's had to deal with. Well, what would you abstract from this? Obviously, some people say this is about artistic freedom. Some would say this is about religion versus secularism. I guess to you, what's the fundament? What's the fundamental?
All of those things, which come under the general moniker of protecting and defending Western civilization. But as usual, we don't snuff out the disease of anti-Westernism and violence at the very start, and so it can metastasize over years like this and become an ever-present danger that we just sort of cope with and live with perpetually, instead of dealing with it from the very beginning the way it deserves to be dealt with. And in this case, this probably goes back to 1979, 10 years before the fatwa was issued against Salman Rushdie, letting the Iranian religious militants get away with kidnapping and holding American citizens hostages for over 400 days without serious retaliation, has emboldened them to do things like this: issue fatwas against Western writers, which I think is a declaration of war, and issue rewards for the heads of various, for the literal heads of our statesmen, like Secretary Pompeo, I think, has a $30 million reward for his head in Iran. Those are declarations of war, as far as I'm concerned, directly against American citizens and against Western civilization in general. And you should snuff it out immediately.
Yeah, ever since the Iranian Revolution and the taking of American hostages in Iran in 1979, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, has been at war with America. But not only that, not only have the Iranians attacked American troops throughout the 80s and till now, not only have they targeted our publishers and nationalized American and European owned property, that is businesses from those continents owned property, such as oil resources, but even worse, they have inspired, they have served as a model for people like Osama bin Laden and people, whether they're Sunni or Shiite or whatever they are, people who want to see Islam reign supreme, Islam rule over the world. They see that, they see, the West can be overtaken. Western interests can be taken. The world can be overtaken by Sharia law or whatever type of law that is represented by Islamic rule. So it serves as a concrete example to people like bin Laden and ISIS of what may be possible. And the Palestinians, definitely the religious elements over there, which is basically, I think, a big part of it since the 80s. People who want to see Islam rule over mankind are inspired by the Iranian regime. So there have long been many reasons for America and other Western countries to take the Islamic threat seriously, specifically from Iran. Now, when they threaten and try to kill Salman Rushdie and his affiliates, this is an attack on free speech. This is an attack on free thought, because without free speech, you can't really think freely. This is something I hear objectivists talk about, right? The relationship between speech and thought, which is a hard one for me to really always understand, if I'm honest. Well, can't you think freely but watch what you say? I mean, we all do that all the time, right? Like, you don't always say what you think.
Right, but I think the essence of a free society is a persuasion society where various conflicting points of view are able to put their ideas out there and enable you to compare and contrast, and that's what gives you the capacity to think even more clearly. So it's certainly a free speech enables us to take advantage of the social mechanism as a magnifier of knowledge. And I think that's vital. And yeah, this is an attack against free speech, and it should be dealt with extremely harshly. But of course, it won't be. These monsters. I think the political class in general thinks that ever-present monsters are very good things, because they keep us in a constant state of hypervigilance, but not for what we need to be hypervigilant for, but for these enemies that are constantly out there. It distracts our attention away from what we need to be focused on.
So the reason that America, the government and the military doesn't address this threat, you're saying, is in part because they want us to be like, they want to drag this thing out. Or is that kind of the consequence of? Well,
I think that's a consequence. I think they're just philosophically and morally backwards. But I also think it serves the practical purpose of keeping the electorate distracted and in a constant state of need for the political class. They like emergencies. They like war. The government phrases everything in warfare and battle terms and in emergency terms, and that's the way they want the citizen to stay in a constant state of emergency, which I think is unfortunate for our psychologies. But don't you think this is where we're finding ourselves today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when politicians run for office, or when politically motivated news media are reporting events, they frame it as, this is an emergency, this is a crisis, everything, the sky is falling. So then why won't they deal with this actual threat, such as the Islamic threat, or particularly the Iranian regime's ongoing attacks on Western countries and Western interests? One of the reasons, I think, being actually dealing with the truth, actually dealing with reality is kind of a bridge too far for a lot of us here in the Western world, because of, said philosophical choices. Also, confronting religion, because America is a largely religious society, sadly, or has become so. Definitely, like people like George W. Bush are very religious and always had a very hard time believing, and let alone promoting the idea that religious people could do stuff like 9/11, that religious people who truly are religious could harm the innocent. So they try saying, no, they're not even really Muslim. This is not Islam. This is a bastardization of Islam. So they have a hard time confronting a religion, because that would mean being open to the idea that religion is antithetic to rational, civilized life. And of course, altruism is also kind of sort of underlying a lot of this, because confronting a real threat assertively, that requires a real ego, that requires first-handedness and selfishness. And of course, altruism says you may not, altruism, of course, has turned the other cheek. So their religion and sort of secular altruism are joined together and saying, turn the other cheek when somebody slaps you.
Yeah, there's that. And I think the secular left, has the anti-colonialist approach, which basically pigeonholes capitalism as a colonial imperialistic type of power, as opposed to a free sort of economic system, and holds that system, that imperialist colonialist system, as responsible for all the injustice in the world and all the resulting hostility in the world towards the United States. So we got the religionists on the right, who can't confront fanatical religious freaks, murderous freaks, because of their understanding of religion and the relationship to that. And we have the people on the secular left who equate, our political power and economic power with, thievery and abuse and slavery, and hold all hostility against us from these other countries, these benighted countries, as justified, and the violence that they use against us as justified.
Yeah, no matter. So anytime America or a Western country is attacked by a Muslim force, a Muslim group or person, it must be our fault. It could only be revenge. It can't possibly be that they're motivated by what they believe, which is their religion and imposing their religion on the rest of us. It can't. No, because we're told people are not motivated by philosophy. They're not motivated by what they believe. We're basically material brutes, right? We're Marxist groups or something, or some equivalent, motivated either by economic interests or by just range of the moment knee-jerk reaction. So if we're attacked, it's either because we're making them poor or because we bombed them first and they're getting revenge. It can only be one of those two things, the way kind of conventional views, I think, see it.
I think so too. And I think there's an element of condescension to these determinists who are saying that, that you can't expect these cultures to act in any other way than they are. And that's part of it as well. Absolutely.
And the tragic thing is, if you listen to Yaron Brook's History of the Middle East lecture series, he tells this story of like through the 19th century and through the 20th century, the wealthy and powerful in the Middle East, they would send their kids to study in Europe. I mean, where, if you have money and power, where do you send your kids to study? And you're in the Middle East at that time. You send them to Europe, to the most prestigious schools. And sadly, by that time, when students were going to school in Europe, they were not learning Enlightenment values. They were not learning individualism, capitalism, and liberalism. They were learning, Kantian, German, like anti-Enlightenment thought. They were learning collectivism. They were learning Marxism. They were learning things that were actually antithetic to what makes Europe and the West great, what makes Europe successful. So these Arab or Persian men were sending their sons to study in order to find out what makes the West successful. And their kids were bringing back ideas that were actually what was going to ruin Western civilization. And of course, these ideas spreading in the Middle East and, Persia or whatever, and Asia, was not actually making them more successful, but was having the opposite effect.
And I think the embrace of the Middle East of fundamentalist religion has gone a long ways to creating an atmosphere where advancement and progress is extremely difficult. So it's not just Marxism. At least Marxism and socialism hold the material world in some sort of value, and I think even Islam does too. They're less embarrassed about material well-being than I think Christians are, but certainly the merging of the state and religion and the fanatical adherence to that merging as will cause serious retrograde issues in a society.
Yeah. Marilyn with $5 says, we continue to pay for our cowardly, lame, pathetic response in 1979. We should have beat the crap out of Iran then. And then Marilyn again says, presidents reflect the culture. Presidents are followers, not leaders. It's the culture that must change, starting in the universities. Yeah, that's well, that's how I see it. The political classes are essentially bottom feeders when you actually think about it. They want the support of the voters or of the donors, and ultimately they give the public what they want. People always talk about these politicians like they're manipulating us, like they're not doing what we want them. They're doing exactly what we quote want them to do. They're giving us a lobby system. You know, if we wanted laissez-faire capitalism, we would elect people that are going to implement that. So that's what we need. We need the culture to change, and it starts with you and me.
That's correct.
So Salman Rushdie was attacked, and that's an attack on free speech. And free speech is important. One of the main reasons you said is because of persuasion is necessary in order to get to the truth, in order to have ideas. So if free speech is taken away, then we can't change the culture. We can't change the world because we're not free to debate. We're not free to express a philosophical idea. So that's one of the reasons, and maybe the main reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can't deal with one another as reasoning beings through persuasion. We only have the fist and the sword and the gun. Those are the only two ways that you can deal with human beings. So that's why one of the reasons I think Peikoff had said a long time ago, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the time to rebel is when there's no more freedom of speech. That's when it's time to take arms. And we see a country now where the traditional, supporters of free speech are actually hostile to it, overtly hostile to it. And the right's solution is to the rationalism of the left and their particular rejection of the Enlightenment is to reject the Enlightenment in its own right too. The individualism of the Enlightenment, which I think they blame a lot of our problems today on the individualism that the Enlightenment gave birth to. So we have two illiberal, anti-Enlightenment political points of view dominating the political discourse right now, and that has to change. But I don't think it can change until we change the culture.
Right. And we need to change it by offering a positive. So in addition to owning the libs and opponing the right, we need to offer a very positive view, a positive philosophy. So the religious right, or conservatives in general, and this is increasingly so in recent years, they're losing their love for free speech. They are warming up to the idea that maybe insulting religion, for instance, should not be constitutionally protected, because religion is a fundamental of our society, the way they see it. They see that the insulting of religion and the public rejection of religion actually brought about a lot of this leftist mishigasim that we're dealing with here in the world. So that's kind of those people they don't really have the caliber. They don't really have the is caliber the word? They don't have the ammunition to face a threat like this against Salman Rushdie. And then, of course, the left, the nihilists, the subjectivists, to them, oppression is the greatest form of currency. So as soon as someone makes the case that Muslims are being oppressed and being that there's bigotry against Muslims, then you can never get mad at any Muslim for anything. And anything that comes out of the Islamic world is only a response to Western imperialism, and it can only be revenge, and they had no choice but to do it. So these are the people that are supposed to stand up for Salman Rushdie. I think not. Have you read Salman Rushdie's book, by the way? Because I have not.
I have not read the Satanic Verses.
But you've seen some of the Danish cartoons that caused more violence in around the mid 2000s, of course. Yeah. A lot easier to look at those cartoons than it is to read an entire book. And you've seen South Park. You've seen some of the South Park episodes relating to Islam and Muhammad, or did you not have cable at that time or something?
I have cable, but I just wasn't into South Park. Sorry.
No, this is important stuff. I mean, the South Park Cartoon Wars, it was called. So South Park, they're so funny. They took the opportunity to criticize the show Family Guy in this 2-part episode. episode thing where they're like, they're making it about the Danish cartoons and how Muhammad cannot be depicted by cartoonists without facing violence from the Islamic world. But South Park went about it by also insulting Family Guy and just saying that Family Guy is not a very good show. It was pretty cool. But I mean, and it's relevant because of the social commentary relating to free speech, etc. So and South Park continued attempting to depict Muhammad, but Comedy Central would not air it. Comedy Central would not show the image of Muhammad. Then later HBO, which purchased all the South Park episodes, they declined to purchase and air those particular episods that were going to feature Muhammad.
Well, and it just goes to show you how cowardly Hollywood is on every level, and that doesn't discourage the violence; it encourages it, right? It shows the bullies that you're going to give into threats of violence. You should be putting that shit Boss says. You should be putting this shit in their face. You should be doing it every day.
I have an original Bosch Fawston right here. He drew Muhammad handing the football to Family Guy, which was what South Park attempted to depict, but was not allowed on TV. But I think one of the bombings of the Times Square, in New York around the late 2000s, around 2009 or 10, was said to be in response to South Park's attempt to show Muhammad. Basically, like, it was largely speculated, if not outright demonstrated and proven, that attack by an Islamist was in response to South Park's attempt to show Muhammad. And some people at Comedy Central, like people working there, people somewhat loosely related to South Park, said, like, these people are putting us at risk. Like, so I tend to say, as cowardly as it is when newspapers and when networks won't go near this cartoon, won't go near Muhammad, it really is the government's job to be protecting our free speech. It really is, the Pentagon and the military's job to tell the world, don't threaten the First Amendment of Americans. So the fact that the government has failed to do that, the fact that the government has not done that, I think is really the real problem, because it shouldn't be the job of private citizens to take that kind of risk. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're afraid, justifiably, because they know the government isn't going to be there. They're not going to fill the gap for them when push comes to shove. They're going to, make excuses, and they're going to be out on their own against these militant freaks. That said, I mean, I understand the fear, but I don't think we should give into it. I think we should continue to press for the right types of values in the face of this kind of violence.
Right. And Marilyn with $2 says Muhammad pictures should be everywhere. And everywhere.
The Ayatollah should be issuing fatwas, by the millions every single day.
Yeah, another sort of chapter in the story of Muhammad cartoons was Charlie Hebdo, or I think the tail end of 2013. Their headquarters were shot up, and for showing the Prophet Muhammad, and everywhere on the internet and everywhere you went, you saw signs that said, however you pronounce it, Jesuit Charlie, right? Like, I am Charlie.
Je suis Charlie.
Je suis Charlie. And so everyone's saying, I'm Charlie. Really? Because Charlie was showing the actual cartoon, and you're just using words. I mean, why don't you show the actual cartoon if you are Charlie? It was a little bit strange, I thought, that so many people wanted to show their solidarity with Charlie Hebdo, except they wouldn't actually show the cartoon that got them shot up.
Well, we're in the age of virtue signaling, and it's the act of claiming and asserting that you stand for something that's more important than actually doing something about it.
That's for sure. All right. So speaking of not empty virtue signaling, please become a member of the channel and actually get education, entertainment, as well as supporting a network that is going to spread good ideas, because there's no way around it, folks. It's the only way we're going to get there. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic. Basically, we covered Salman Rushdie and free speech. There was, I think, targeting of American publishers and translators and stores that sold Salman Rushdie's book. So this is very much an American problem. This is not just, some English situation that
he was attacked in 1989. He went into hiding, as you said. I think one of the translators of his books was murdered. And there were attacks and threats on various stores that chose to advertise his book. So this is a serious thing, man. I say drone strike the Ayatollah.
Yeah, absolutely. He's had it coming for a long time. And more, I would say, not because we enjoy gratuitous violence and war, but because there is a time to kill. There's a time to act in self-defense, and Iran definitely has it coming. The regime and embolden the rebels. I mean, there's a list of tactics that would be most effective in toppling the regime over there and emboldening the better forces within the rebels. But we don't even believe in again, like here in this culture, we don't believe in Western civilization. So how are we ever going to spread it? How are we ever going to encourage it in Iran?
Well, the people in places of power and in the information world certainly don't believe in Western civilization. So we have to try to usurp those places and start a renaissance.
That's absolutely right. And a reminder to everyone, Leonard Peikoff and the Objectivists were on top of this from the start. Ayn Rand was on top of Iran. Ayn Rand was on top of the Islamic Republic of Iran way back when, at the end of her life, she was saying, we're going to pay for this forever. And yeah, like I said, Iran served as a model to bin Laden, to the Palestinian religionists who might have mellowed out, but for the shining, inspiring example of what Iran represented to them. I mean, there's just so many ways, incalculable, how different the world could be today if America had dealt with Iran and nipped it at the bud. I mean, 9/11 likely would not have been what it was. Bush might have been an unremarkable president. Then there's probably no Obama and no Trump. I mean, it's hard to know how different the world could be today if America had just dealt with this threat against America when it was time. All right. On that inspiring note, coming up at 9 p.m. UK time today, it's HBTV with Harry Binswanger on Ayn Rand and John Hospers. So looking forward to that. And we'll be back here tomorrow for the Daily Objective. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And goodbye.